So here, this is a Dell Latitude E6540. As I mentioned in the last episode, this is running an organization copy of Windows 7 Professional. Again, as I said, this has a domain attached to the system. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to be restoring this machine back to the way it was when it left the factory. So on this USB here, I have the original factory image. So I have the original factory image on a USB flash drive. So we're going to plug that flash drive into the system and restart. Now on many Dell computers, the boot key is F12. There we go, preparing one-time boot menu. You can see there's no support assist OS recovery because this computer is from 2013. So we're going to boot off of the USB. And it says, now it's loading the files. Oh yes, I remember the orbs going along the screen. There is already a difference from a standard installation of Windows. Well, basically, essentially, if you purchase a retail copy, because you don't get this screen, because this is a special screen, so you have to, so it puts my language is, and it translates it into many other languages. So essentially, you just click it, and then it's just a standard installation. So if you were to go out and buy a standard copy of Windows 7 and you were to install it, this is the first screen you would see. And pretty much everything just goes as it is. So we're going to go ahead and install. On this particular machine, I actually did use a Dell recovery USB. And it was right after I hit install now where it was stuck for like about maybe like a minute up to 2 minutes, I believe. I think it was either like 1 minute, maybe up to 5. And during that time, it was actually in the process of formatting the hard drive. As soon as that happened, though, as soon as it got to the either the license agreement like here or where do you want to install Windows, right where it got to that, it went to a support assist recovery screen saying that your system has having trouble starting and your system is being scanned to see if there's any hardware problems. And then as soon as I aborted the test, then it just shut down. Oh, getting Windows ready. Ah yes, a really outdated system. And yes, this is the media from Dell, Windows 7 Professional Service Pack 1. We had to accept the terms. We cannot upgrade because we are not within Windows. In fact, we are going to be deleting this partition. So this is a 500 gig hard drive. I can already tell. So this here is the organization installation of Windows 7, and then this is the system reserved probably for the recovery. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this partition. And there we go. All of the organization stuff is gone. So we're going to go ahead and OK to erase that partition. And now we have the full partition free. And off we go. Now since this is going to be on actual hardware, this is going to take a little while than what it usually goes on a virtual machine. Because when I've been running Windows installations on virtual machines, they did not take as long, and it looks like this may be the same story here. I mean, we're already at like 8%. So it looks like we may already be done with this process within just a few minutes. But here's that Inspiron again from the last episode. Yes, again, I showed off how depleted the battery is. It's very, very depleted. I mean, it's so depleted that the battery won't even hold a charge anymore. And it does make sense, too, because the last time I used it was back in, I think, like a few months after I got my new laptop. That's where, you know, I was just using it and then it just suddenly shut off, and then it was just doing a whole color pattern like thing, and every so often just beeping and stuff like that. It was just terrible. And in fact, it had been doing that for over a week. Well, actually about a week it had been doing that, and then when we were in touch with Dell support, it just suddenly started working again. It actually decided to load Windows. So until that time, I had to have my old laptop take over, and so far as for that other one, it's been doing well ever since. So, well, other than that other thing that I had just mentioned. So, this is going a lot quicker than I thought. I mean, we're already halfway through with the copying files stage of the setup. Now, as I had already mentioned in the last episode, when I was creating this recovery media, I was curious to see if this would come up with Windows 8 or Windows 8.1 or even Windows 10. But I was surprised to find out that this thing actually had Windows 7. So then I just went ahead and see what would my options be if I were to use the recovery. So when I was going to see what it would contain, I've discovered that it would only contain the operating system. It wouldn't contain any of the drivers. So that would mean I would have to find the drivers on Dell's website after the installation. So there's one particular thing I'm going after. There's a lot of old stuff in here. Select to choose what happens with removable drives. Aha, this is the file I've been looking for. Well, I guess I could call this a Dellosaurus 2.0, and I can't even copy this file. Well, that's what this USB is for. Because I'm going to be formatting that USB after we finish with the recovery. As I'm going to be formatting the USB we're using now after the recovery is done. Some of the programs that I usually use on a regular basis, like for instance Audacity, or I might end up putting the Microsoft Edge browser onto here because, I mean, it is compatible with Windows 7. Because, I mean, when Internet Explorer lost support a few months ago, Microsoft had already blocked Internet Explorer from running. That was even on a later build of Windows 10 that they did. So, pretty much one of the only this is pretty much one of the only OSs where you could still use Internet Explorer. Windows 10, pretty much you can't anymore. On 11, it's impossible because it's no longer on the system altogether. Turn on virus protection. That's because Kaspersky is really out of date. I mean, it's running on databases from like 2021, which is a couple years out of date. Alright, now it is ready for the reboot. So now it's ready to restart. At this point, there is no going back. We're already nearly done with the reset. So pretty much if we were to cancel it now, this is it. It's too late. We can't go back. We're just going to have to let it finish. So then again, as I said earlier, I'll have to supply the drivers after the installation. So now it's adjusting the display. And it's ready to wrap up. Because even if we were to try and cancel it, it would say cannot be canceled at this point, as it could leave in an unusable state. Yeah, that's right, because even if you try to cancel it, it would say installation of Windows is not fully completed, you must restart installation. So essentially it's like a do-over kind of thing. Setup is preparing your computer for first use. Well, this is actually going to be the first official use by me of this particular machine, however. Because I don't know any of the passwords to get into any accounts on that domain. But all the other computers that are connected to the same domain, like for instance this machine here, will go through the same process. However, this doesn't have an OS, so that will just go straight to the installation. The Lenovo will go through the same process as well. And now the installation is officially complete. So this is pretty much just your typical out-of-box experience. Now usually I don't want to use a personal name, so personally I just use a standard name. I'll just name it Nostalgia Lat, because it's a Latitude machine. And no, I am not going to apply a password. And we will use the recommended settings, even though Windows 7 is no longer receiving updates, and the paid update service has long since ended. And yes, since there are no drivers installed, it just goes right to the first logon. Or rather, I'd like to use the term sign in, because that's what Microsoft uses nowadays. They use the terms sign in and sign out. And you can tell we don't have the proper display drivers because it's like at an 800 by 600 resolution. But we will easily fix that once we get the drivers installed. So at this point, I can go ahead and take out the recovery USB. And there we are. We are at the desktop. And again, as I said, we do not have any of the Aero stuff, and that's because we don't have any of the drivers installed. And again, as I said, we could change themes and whatnot. But again, we will not get any of the fancy Aero effects. I mean, you know, Windows 7 is actually a lot better with the Aero. However, since we don't have the proper display drivers, we unfortunately will not be able to use Aero. But again, as I said, this is a typical installation, because all it did was just install Windows 7 as a standard copy. So you can see you got all the stuff here, all these accessories, Windows Update, and all that stuff. And there is also an update patch that I will need to install if I want to get this thing fully updated, because there's, again, as I said, there's no internet connection, and it wouldn't even with just this, it won't even be able to find any updates in the first place anyway, because again, as I had said, the Windows Update servers for older operating systems were shut down. It was most likely sometime after Microsoft ended support for Windows 7. Well, now the good part about this is now we can actually get into Windows. However, we still need to install the drivers in order to maintain full functionality. So for right now, it's going to remain in a state of limbo until we can figure things out. So here is all the partitions on all the drives. This is the recovery partition we're going to delete. This is the active partition. Yes, I am sure. So that's going to delete the recovery media off the USB. And there we go. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create a new volume. We're going to use the entire drive. Can't do EFG. We're going to do the G. And we're just going to name it as it is. Yeah, can't even do the fade to lock, because again, doesn't do the fade lock sequence because again, as I said, there is no drivers on the system. It's just using the standard Microsoft drivers for the particular machine, so we can't adjust the brightness or anything. Yeah, I can't do that, but that will be resolved once we install the drivers on the system. And what do you know? It's almost time to restart. It's almost time to restart for a system update. Well, we'll be done with this thing soon enough. And there we go. As you can see, we now have our new volume. As you can see now, we have our new volume. I'm going to reformat it, and this time I'm going to name it PNY. I'm just going to call it PNY for short. And then we're going to format it again. And there we go. Now this is a much larger file system, so now it can copy over the video or whatever I wanted to copy over. In the next episode, we are going to be installing the drivers onto this machine, and then we're going to create recovery media for one of these other computers, either the Vostro or the Inspiron, and then in a later episode we'll work with the Lenovo and the HP, and eventually we'll work on restoring this HP back to Windows 8. So those are what the future So those are what are to come in the series. So for now, since this doesn't have any drivers, these are just the standard Microsoft drivers. So as soon as I get the drivers installed, then I'll start installing some commonly used programs that I use on my regular computer in my office onto this machine. More particularly, see if I can put Office on there, VLC, Audacity, and a lot of other programs, and maybe an antivirus too as well. But that will be for a later time. So until then, this has been Nostalgia Paradise. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.